Welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Have you ever met people who think they can manipulate everything to their advantage? Those who believe they are smarter than everyone else, capable of lying, deceiving, and controlling others without ever facing the consequences. They live in the illusion that the world is their personal playground, where they can pull the strings and make everyone dance to their tune. But not everyone is so easily manipulated. Today, we'll witness a story full of surprises and satisfaction, a well-deserved lesson for those who think they can outsmart everyone. A person who believes they are cunning enough to deceive and take advantage of others to get what they want. But this time, they've met an unexpected opponent, someone who is not only immune to their tricks but also ready to expose their true nature. Get ready for an epic twist. Don't look away, because this shocking turn of events will keep you hooked until the very end. Story 1, The Rude Customer and the Price He Paid. It was a busy day at the hardware store where Sarah worked as a cashier. She was used to dealing with all kinds of customers, but the man who approached the checkout counter that day carried an especially unpleasant attitude. He slammed a chainsaw onto the counter, crossed his arms, and glared at Sarah as if she had already made a mistake. Keeping her professional smile, she greeted him. "Hello, sir. Your total is $149.99. Would you like to pay with cash or card?" The man said nothing, simply pulled out his wallet and rudely tossed a $100 bill and a handful of crumpled cash onto the counter. Sarah carefully counted the money, handed him the change and his receipt. But instead of taking it normally, the man grabbed the money, crumpled the receipt in his fist, and without hesitation, threw it back at her. "I don't need this," he snapped, before storming out with his chainsaw. Sarah stood still for a moment, watching the crumpled receipt land on the counter. Without a word, she gently picked it up and, with a knowing smile, dropped it into the trash bin beside her. No one expected what would happen just minutes later. The same man came storming back into the store, his face red with anger. "This chainsaw is defective. I want an exchange," he bellowed. Sarah remained calm. "Sir, to process a return, our store requires the original receipt." The man frowned and frantically searched his pockets. But of course, he couldn't find what he was looking for. "Can't you just reprint it?" Sarah shook her head politely. "I'm sorry, but we cannot reprint receipts. However, if you still have your original one, we can process your exchange right away." It took a second for the realization to hit him. His eyes darted to the counter, then to the trash bin beside Sarah, the very same place where she had dropped the receipt just moments ago. His face darkened. The trash bin in a hardware store wasn't exactly a pleasant place. Inside were all kinds of discarded items, oil-stained paper towels, spilled coffee cups, and scraps of wood covered in glue. The man hesitated, then, reluctantly, bent down. Sarah and a few nearby customers watched in silence as the once arrogant and rude man now knelt beside the trash, sifting through the filthy, sticky mess. His earlier smug expression had vanished, replaced by a grimace of frustration and disgust. Some customers covered their mouths to stifle laughter, while others simply observed with a mix of amusement and mild pity. No one said a word, but the message was clear: this was karma in action. Finally, after a few agonizing moments, the man found the crumpled receipt. But by now, it was soaked in coffee, torn at the edges, and had absorbed a rather unpleasant odor. He scowled, pressing his lips together as if debating whether to continue. But he had no choice. Begrudgingly, he smoothed out the damp paper and held it out to Sarah, avoiding eye contact. Sarah, still maintaining her professional smile, took the receipt without a hint of judgment. She flattened it out as if it were just another routine transaction. No sarcastic remark, no smug look, just business as usual. But everyone in the store knew that this was far from ordinary. The man stood there, his face still burning with embarrassment, whether from frustration or shame, no one could tell. No more outbursts, no more arrogance. And from that day on, no one ever saw him treat a cashier rudely again. Moral of the story. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of treating others with respect. When you act rudely and disregard people, sooner or later, you'll face the consequences of your own behavior. The man in the story thought he could throw away something valuable without a second thought, only to realize moments later that he needed it the most. And in the end, his own arrogance forced him into a situation he would never forget. Respect is a two-way street. Treat others with kindness, and you'll receive kindness in return. But if you choose to look down on people, one day, you might find yourself kneeling in the very mess you created, just like the man digging through the trash for his own mistake. Story 2, The Overloaded Honda Civic Disaster. It was a scorching afternoon at the hardware store, bustling with customers and the constant hum of activity. Employees were busy moving supplies, forklifts whirred, and the steady beeping of cash registers filled the air. Amid the chaos, a man strode in with an air of supreme confidence, his exaggerated gestures making it clear that he had meticulously planned the shopping trip. He walked straight to the sales counter, planted both hands firmly on the counter, and declared with certainty, "I need to buy 1,000 pounds of premixed concrete." The store clerk, a young man with plenty of experience, glanced at the customer and then out to the parking lot. Instantly, he spotted a major problem. The man's vehicle was a small Honda Civic, definitely not the right kind of transport for such a massive load. "Are you sure?" the clerk asked politely. 1,000 pounds is a lot. I don't think a Civic can handle that kind of weight." Instead of reconsidering, the man simply scoffed and waved dismissively, as if brushing aside a foolish remark. "My car is strong. I've hauled way more than this before. Trust me, it'll be fine." The clerk hesitated for a moment. He had dealt with stubborn customers before, but few were this overconfident, completely ignoring basic physics. However, since the customer wasn't violating store policy, there wasn't much he could do. With a reluctant nod, he proceeded with the order. One by one, the heavy bags of concrete were loaded into the Civic's trunk. At first, the car remained upright, but as more weight was added, the rear end sagged lower and lower, almost touching the ground. The tires bulged dangerously, looking like they were on the verge of bursting. Other store employees started to take notice. A few stood at a distance, exchanging skeptical glances. One of them whistled softly and muttered to a colleague, "Want to bet on how far that car will make it?" "I say, it won't even make it out of the parking lot." "Ha, I bet it won't even reach the front gate." At last, with all the concrete loaded, the man shut the trunk, dusted off his hands, and looked around triumphantly. He smirked at the employees, as if to prove they had underestimated him. "See? No problem at all." He got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and slowly pressed the gas pedal, heading toward the exit. Then, crack! A loud, sickening sound echoed through the lot, making everyone turn their heads. The Honda Civic groaned, then lurched to a stop in the middle of the driveway, like a wounded animal hit with a fatal blow. One side of the car had nearly collapsed, the suspension clearly overwhelmed by the sheer weight. The rear tires were practically flattened against the pavement. A few small parts had even fallen off the undercarriage, rolling across the lot. A burning smell from the braking system started to fill the air. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, soft chuckles began to spread among the employees and nearby customers. The man hastily got out of his car, his face bright red, not with pride, but with sheer embarrassment. He stared at his crippled car, completely helpless. "Damn it." The store clerk from earlier walked up, arms crossed, and shrugged. "Told you so." With no other options, the man pulled out his phone and dialed a number. As he waited, he stood awkwardly next to his broken car, avoiding eye contact with the amused onlookers. 2 hours later, a large SUV pulled up. A woman stepped out, her face filled with frustration. One glance at her expression was enough to tell everyone that the poor guy was about to get a serious earful. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, arms crossed. "How?" 2 hours later, a large SUV pulled up. A woman stepped out, her face filled with frustration. One glance at her expression was enough to tell everyone that the poor guy was about to get a serious earful. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, arms crossed. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Nobody could hear the man's response. His voice had suddenly grown much quieter than before. The store employees had to stifle their laughter as they watched the woman give him a firm scolding. After some heated discussion, the couple silently began unloading the heavy bags, sweating as they transferred them to the SUV, an actual vehicle built for the job. It took them a long time, but eventually, they finished. When the man finally drove away, he didn't say another word to the store employees. But everyone knew he had just learned a very expensive lesson about the limits of both his car and his own judgment. The takeaway. This story perfectly illustrates how overconfidence and ignoring good advice can lead to serious consequences. Sometimes, acknowledging your own limitations isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom and responsibility. If the man had listened to the store clerk's warning, he could have avoided this disaster. Instead, his stubbornness not only wrecked his car but also turned him into a living example of why respecting the laws of physics and common sense is essential. Sometimes, the cost of arrogance isn't just a lesson, it's also a hefty repair bill. Story 3, the free-falling refrigerator. It was a scorching afternoon at the appliance store. The sun reflected off the vast parking lot, creating dazzling streaks of light. Employees were busy assisting customers, while small trucks and SUVs came and went, loading up newly purchased goods. Amid the hustle and bustle, a middle-aged man strode in with an air of confidence. His eyes scanned the store before heading straight to the checkout counter. Today, he was here to buy a brand-new, high-end refrigerator, one of those sleek, premium models that looked like it had just stepped out of a luxury commercial. Everything went smoothly. After completing his purchase, the man requested assistance in loading the refrigerator onto the bed of his pickup truck, a visibly old and well-worn vehicle that had clearly hauled its fair share of heavy loads. The store employees promptly wheeled the massive fridge out to the parking lot. They carefully lifted it onto the truck bed and were about to secure it with heavy-duty ropes to ensure its stability. But just as one employee reached for the rope, the man waved his hand dismissively and scoffed confidently. "No need. I have my own tie-downs." The employee blinked and glanced at what the man was holding. To his surprise, it was a spool of thin coaxial cable, the kind used for TV connections. It was utterly unsuitable for securing a refrigerator weighing hundreds of kilograms. "Are you sure?" the employee asked, keeping his voice calm. "This type of cable isn't strong enough. Even a small bump in the road could." "Listen," the man interrupted, visibly irritated. "I've strapped things to my truck 100 times. I know what I'm doing." An awkward silence followed. The employees exchanged knowing glances, silently predicting what was about to unfold. But no one wanted to argue with a stubborn customer who seemed overly confident in his abilities. "All right, it's your call," the employee shrugged and stepped back, allowing the man to do it his way. The man clumsily wrapped the flimsy cable around the refrigerator, pulled it tight in an unconvincing manner, and nodded in satisfaction as if he had just performed a masterful feat of engineering. The staff watched quietly, and a few whispered among themselves. "I bet it won't even make it past the first intersection." "Nah, I say it flies off the moment he hits the highway." One way or another, they all knew disaster was looming. The inevitable consequence. The man climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove off with a smug expression. The refrigerator stood precariously in the truck bed, held in place only by a laughably weak cable. Less than 2 miles down the road, just as he merged onto the highway, his truck hit a pothole. The thin cable snapped like a worn-out thread. Bang! The refrigerator flew off the truck bed, crashing onto the pavement with a bone-rattling impact. Car horns blared as nearby drivers swerved to avoid the tumbling appliance. It rolled violently across the asphalt, leaving deep scars on its pristine surface, before slamming into the median with a deafening crack. The disaster was complete, its door flung open, glass shelves shattered into fragments, the control panel was crushed, and the once flawless exterior was now a warped mess of metal. The man slammed on his brakes, eyes wide in horror as he stared at the wreckage. His $1,000 investment was now nothing more than a heap of expensive scrap. Other drivers slowed down to gawk. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others chuckled, and a few even pulled out their phones to record the scene. A few minutes later, still fuming with frustration, the man made a furious U-turn and sped back to the appliance store. The store's perfect response. Storming into the customer service desk, he slammed his hand on the counter, making nearby shoppers jump in surprise. "Your fridge just broke on the way home," he roared. "I demand a refund or a replacement immediately." The employees were momentarily stunned. He recounted the accident as if it were somehow the store's responsibility. But before he could escalate the situation further, the store's security officer stepped forward, holding a tablet with a knowing smirk. "Are you sure you want to file a complaint?" the officer asked, tilting the screen toward him. On the display was crystal clear footage from the store's security cameras, capturing every crucial moment. The man refusing the heavy-duty ropes. Him carelessly securing the fridge with flimsy coaxial cable. The refrigerator flying off the truck and rolling across the highway. The man's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth to argue but, upon seeing the undeniable evidence, found himself speechless. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he turned on his heels and stormed out of the store, walking so fast it was almost a sprint, as if trying to outrun his embarrassment. Meanwhile, employees and customers alike could only chuckle and shake their heads. The lesson learned. This story is a perfect example of how carelessness and overconfidence can lead to disastrous consequences. If the man had just listened to the store employees, he could have avoided this humiliating and costly mistake. But instead, his inflated ego cost him both his money and his dignity. The takeaway here is simple. Never underestimate the importance of proper safety measures, especially when transporting valuable goods. Don't let overconfidence override common sense. Sometimes, the people with more experience really are just trying to help you. And most importantly, know when to listen. Story 5, The Petty Revenge on the Milkshake Customer. It was a late afternoon at a well-known fast food restaurant, and the place was buzzing with activity. The sound of deep fryers sizzling, customers placing orders, and children laughing blended into the usual lively atmosphere. Behind the counter, a team of employees in red and yellow uniforms worked tirelessly. A young worker named Alex was busy preparing drinks when a middle-aged customer with a receding hairline and a slightly protruding belly approached the counter, looking rather grumpy. "Give me a large vanilla milkshake." Alex smiled and quickly got to work. He poured the milkshake from the machine, ensuring it had the perfect creamy consistency according to the restaurant's formula. Then, he sealed the lid and handed it to the customer with a polite tone. "Here you go, sir. Enjoy." But the moment the customer picked up the cup, his face twisted in displeasure as if he had just uncovered a grave mistake. "This is too thick," he snapped. "I can't even suck it up through the straw." "Do it again." Alex was a bit taken aback but maintained his professional smile. "Sir, our milkshakes are intentionally thick to keep their rich flavor. But if you'd like, I can make it slightly thinner for you." "I don't care. Just do it over." The second attempt, still not good enough. Despite feeling a little frustrated, Alex patiently made another milkshake, this time adding a bit more milk to slightly reduce the thickness while keeping the texture as close to the original as possible. He carefully placed the new milkshake on the counter, smiling again. "Here you go, sir. I've made it a little thinner this time. I hope you'll be satisfied." But after taking just one sip, the customer shook his head vigorously. "This is still too thick. I can't drink it. Do you even know how to make a milkshake?" Other customers began to glance over, whispering among themselves. Another employee, Emma, stood nearby, exchanging a sympathetic look with Alex. Everyone knew customers like this, those who would never be satisfied no matter what you did. Taking a deep breath, Alex calmly explained. "Sir, this is how our milkshakes are made. If we make it too thin, it won't taste the same. But I can adjust it a little more if you'd like." "Don't lecture me on how to drink a milkshake," the customer snapped. Just do as I say." At this point, Alex had completely lost his patience. But still, he kept his polite smile. "Of course, sir. Let me make you the perfect milkshake just the way you want it." The subtle revenge. This time, Alex no longer bothered following the restaurant's standard recipe. He poured in an excessive amount of milk, watering it down to the point that it was almost liquid, barely more than vanilla-flavored white water. He stirred it up, poured it into a cup, sealed the lid, and handed it over with an overly enthusiastic grin. "Here's a special milkshake, made just for you. You'll definitely have no trouble sipping it through the straw." The customer eagerly took a big gulp, only to freeze in place. The taste was utterly bland, weak, and nothing like the rich, creamy milkshake he had originally wanted. It was like drinking vanilla-flavored water. His face slowly turned pale, his lips pressed into a thin line in dissatisfaction. But since he had been complaining so much, he couldn't exactly turn around and demand another one now. Other customers, having witnessed the entire scene, chuckled quietly. Some even nodded toward Alex as if to say, "Well played." With no other choice, the disgruntled customer grabbed his perfect milkshake and stomped out of the restaurant, looking utterly defeated. Lessons learned. The customer is not always right. Sometimes, their stubbornness and nitpicking only lead to their own disappointment. Trust the experts. If someone works in an industry, chances are, they know what they're doing. Service workers have their ways of teaching you a lesson. If you're overly difficult and unreasonable, don't be surprised if you receive an unexpected gift in return. So, next time, will you still give service workers a hard time? Life is a series of choices, and how we listen, learn, or ignore advice determines whether we succeed or fail. These stories aren't just funny situations or tales of stubbornness, they highlight how people react to the expertise and warnings of others. Stay humble. Accept that you don't know everything. Sometimes, admitting that you need guidance is the first step to growth. Listen to those with experience. They've been through real situations and know what works best. Don't let ego cloud your judgment. Life doesn't care how confident you are, it only reacts to the choices you make. True intelligence isn't about always proving yourself right, it's about recognizing when you're wrong and being willing to change. So next time someone gives you well-founded advice, pause and think it through. It just might save you from learning a painful and expensive lesson the hard way. Whether it's at a hardware store, a fast food joint, or an auto repair shop, all these stories share a common theme: the consequences of arrogance, blind confidence, and dismissing the knowledge of experts. From the man who overloaded his Honda Civic with cement, the careless customer who tied a fridge with a cable wire, the stubborn Karen who refused to replace her timing belt, and now, the picky milkshake customer who demanded his own custom recipe, they all paid a price that could have been avoided if they had just listened. Confidence is good, but blind confidence can cost you dearly. The customer isn't always right, especially when they refuse to listen to logic and experience. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching you a lesson in the most unforgettable way. So, what will you choose? Will you listen and avoid mistakes, or be stubborn and learn the hard way?